Let me tell you what is in the bill, and I'll let you all decide whether or not this is weak. Let me get down here a compendium of the things that are in the bill. One, the death penalty. It provides 53 death penalty offenses. Weak as can be, you know? We do everything but hang people for jaywalking in this bill. That's weak stuff.
I want to move on to Iowa, if I can, because Joe Biden gave what was considered a blistering speech about President Trump. It was a moment that some said was one of the strongest of his campaign to date. He's been out there on the stump doing retail politics. It is a version of Joe Biden that some people think is one of the better versions of him, but he's also the version of Joe Biden that says things that are controversial inadvertently, to be sure. And Tolu, I want to play you something he said when he was speaking to a group of what we understand was Hispanic and Asian voters in Iowa yesterday. So let's listen to this.
We have this notion that somehow if you're poor, you cannot do it. Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids. Wealthy kids, black kids, Asian kids. No, I really mean it, but think how we think about it.
Poor kids are just as talented, Tolu, as white kids. You know, the distinction there is they're poor whites, and you know, how do you think that plays there? A gaffe, something more than that, a window to his soul? What do you see?
It's definitely a gaffe, and Joe Biden has a long record of making gaffes, so I don't think this one will stand out on that long record, but it does add to the question of whether or not Joe Biden is attuned to the moment, whether or not his moment has passed, and whether or not he knows how to speak to the Democratic base in 2019 and 2020, which is a much more modern, much more woke, if you will, base where words like that and statements like that are sort of seen as relics of the past and not sensitive enough to the diversity of the country. And he may face some of those questions from specifically younger members of the Democratic base, more diverse members of the base. And even though he's leading in the polls, his lead has been very fragile in part because there's some agitation among those members about whether or not he's ready not only to take on Trump, which is a whole nother question, but whether or not he's ready to speak to the issues that face the country in a way that relates to the modern times and not necessarily to his history in the Senate in the 70s and 80s and 90s.
And again, to make poor synonymous with minority is something that's in difficult territory.
Yes, it absolutely is. I mean, he was also asked specifically about calling the president a white supremacist. And we've seen other candidates come out. Most recently, Elizabeth Warren, in that New York Times interview, she said yes, when talking about where they stand on who and what the president is and what he stands for. Josh, he was not willing to go that far. In fact, making the point that he's not going to essentially give the soundbite to be used again. And I think we have that now. Let's play that.
Why are you so hooked on that? You just want me to say the words, so I sound like everybody else. He is encouraging white supremacists. You can determine what that means. I know everybody wants somebody to call somebody a liar. When you say, I don't call people liars, I say they don't tell the truth, okay? You want to hear me say liars, you can put out and say, Biden calls someone a liar. That's not who I am. You got the wrong guy.
As a response, I mean, you can go a couple different ways to this, but as a response, how smart is it of Biden in this case to say, I'm not going to give you that, because clearly he doesn't want it to come back and haunt him, whether it be in a campaign ad from the Trump campaign or elsewhere?
Well, I mean, you know, he did say that Trump enables white supremacists and encourages them. So I don't really see the distinction between saying he encourages them and saying that he is one. Biden evidently does. It seems sort of silly to me. The facts are the facts. A lot of the other candidates have come out and said, you know, he is a white supremacist. I think Elizabeth Warren tweeted it last night or this morning. So, you know, I don't know what he gains other than the fact that Biden sees himself as being a notch to the right of the left, woke, as Tolu called them, candidates, and wants to stay positioned in the center as a moderate. I mean, whether positioning yourself like this on the issue of white supremacy is appropriate or politically helpful? I don't know, but it seemed like a strange distinction for Biden to make.
And again, that combined with the white versus poor, and Susan, he also keeps on referring to Theresa May as Margaret Thatcher, caught himself in the process of it yesterday. Again, part of what has been what is seen as a successful trip to Iowa for the former vice president, but does this continue to raise certain questions about him?
Look, it's all very on brand for Joe Biden, and what you see is what you get. A gaffe-free candidacy was never an option. You know, I've talked to advisor supporters of Joe Biden who, you know, recognize that's part of what makes this such an uncertain moment for the former vice president, is that they themselves don't know what's going to come out of his mouth at any given time. But again, you know, right now he's running in the Democratic primary, where gaffes like that have a different meaning than they would if he was taking on Donald Trump, who, as we know, you know, also has a lot of challenges speaking, and you can't even sort of graph one of his sentences. So that would be a heck of a general election matchup in 2020 between two candidates who anything could come out of their mouths at any given time. But, you know, I do think that something like his statement yesterday about the poor kids really plays differently in the Democratic primary than in a general election context.
A gaffe-free campaign was never an option.
That may be the line of the morning.
So says Susan Glasser. Susan, Toulouse, Josh, thank you very much for being with us this morning.
I had spent years writing what became known as the Biden crime bill. The Biden crime bill. The Biden crime bill.
Democrats right now, especially African Americans, have really looked back on the 1994 crime bill not very fondly. Hillary Clinton herself has come out against it, even though her husband signed it into law. Well, the author of that crime bill was Joe Biden.
The Biden crime bill. The Biden crime bill.
Biden's 1994 crime bill, while implementing sweeping gun control, also helped fuel mass incarceration with financial incentives to keep people behind bars.
The Biden crime bill. The Biden crime bill.
The Biden crime bill is before us, calls for the death penalty for 51 offenses. A wag in the newspaper recently wrote that something to the effect that Biden has made it a death penalty offense for everything but jaywalking.
The Biden crime bill. Biden crime bill.
The Biden-Hatch crime bill, as it becomes law, God willing, I hope that we will have ended once and for all this notion that is a hangover from the 60s, that somehow Democrats are weak on crime and Democratic presidents are weak on crime and Republicans are tough on crime. The truth is, every major crime bill since 1976 that's come out of this Congress, every minor crime bill has had the name of the Democratic senator from the state of Delaware, Joe Biden, on that bill. I like the idea they keep in jail longer. I'm the guy that wrote the bill requiring federal judges to keep people in jail 100% of the time for which they're sentenced, and in notable exceptions, only 85%. So I'm all for tougher enforcement.
We wrote the statute saying burning the flag in and of itself is a crime, period. Boom.
We changed the law so that if you are arrested and you are a drug dealer, under our forfeiture statutes, you can, the government can, take everything you own. Everything from your car to your house, your bank account, not merely what they confiscate in terms of the dollars from the transaction that you've just got caught engaging in. They can take everything. We have laws in the last several years where we don't allow judges discretion to sentence people. Flat time sentencing. You get caught, you go to jail. We've gone from there all the way up to saying, under the leadership of Senator Thurmond, and I'd like to suggest that I take some small credit for it myself as well, and others, the presiding officer, that there is now a death penalty. And we passed it a couple years ago. If you are a major drug dealer, involved in the trafficking of drugs and murder results in your activities, you go to death. And a number of other severe penalties.
Back when Bill Clinton's crime bill passed, Joe Biden was such an outspoken supporter, he said, quote, "I'd like to be running and have someone use the crime bill against me."
We must take back the streets. It doesn't matter whether or not the person that is accosting your son or daughter or my son or daughter, my wife, your husband, my mother, your parents. It doesn't matter whether or not they were deprived as a youth. It doesn't matter or not whether or not they had no background that enabled them to become socialized into the fabric of society. It doesn't matter whether or not they're the victims of society. The end result is they're about to knock my mother on the head with a lead pipe, shoot my sister, beat up my wife, take on my sons. So I don't want to ask what made them do this. They must be taken off the street. That's number one. There's a consensus on that. Unless we do something about that cadre of young people, tens of thousands of them, born out of wedlock, without parents, without supervision, without any structure, without any conscience developing, because they literally, I yield myself 3 more minutes, because they literally have not been socialized. They literally have not had an opportunity. We should focus on them now. If we don't, they will, or a portion of them will, become the predators 15 years from now. And Madam President, we have predators on our streets that society has, in fact, in part because of its neglect, created. Again, it does not mean because we created them that we somehow forgive them or do not take them out of society to protect my family and yours from them. They are beyond the pale, many of those people. Beyond the pale. And it's a sad commentary on society. We have no choice but to take them out of society. And the truth is, we don't very well know how to rehabilitate them at that point. That's the sad truth. I'm the guy that said, rehabilitation, when it occurs, we don't understand it and notice it.
Bobby Rush, member of Congress, said the other day, "I'm ashamed that I voted for the '94 crime bill." You ashamed of that bill?
Not at all. And in fact, I drafted the bill.